What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to a special little video today. I teased it a lot during my top 25. I'm sure I teased it a lot during other videos as well, but I want to go through and I want to discuss with all you fine people certain scenarios and ways that teams can make their conference championship game because there is still a ton of chaos and a ton that can happen this weekend in college football as we try to figure out the championship week picture. If you see me looking over in this direction a lot, it's because I'm still dealing with some technology issues, and just the way that I have to solve them is I have a second monitor and everything is being run through that right now. So I appreciate all of your patience while I'm figuring out my own technology issues. I'm also shooting this video at a lower frame rate because of those technology issues. So if things look jumpy or not as smooth, I apologize for that. It's just the way that I have to record videos now with all the technology issues. But thank you all so much for your support. If you like this video and if you like other content I put out and you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on anything that I upload, because over this next couple of weeks, again, technology issues aside, I'm going to try to upload as much as possible, a lot of content for you guys. And if you're just as big of a college football nerd as I am, you're going to want to stick around on the channel. If you just simply want to kick back, relax, and watch this video, I greatly appreciate you tuning in and watching. And you can also like, comment, share, and support the channel in any other way you can. That really does help support me. But you can also give me a follow on any other social media platform, Twitter, Instagram. Going to try to post a little bit more about some of the other stuff I do as a sports media student within the sports media realm. I would greatly appreciate your support, however you may be able to provide it, whether it's on this platform or off this platform. And without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on in. Who makes it to championship weekend? We're going to be going through the Power 4 conferences and the Mountain West. We're not going to be talking about the American Athletic because that conference championship game is already set. It's going to be Army versus Tulane. So we're going to start with what a lot of people feel like is the most impactful group of 5 conference, which is the Mountain West. It houses Boise State. They might be a top 10 team in the committee's eyes after this weekend. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. And then, of course, the 4 Power 4 conferences, because there's a lot to discuss within theirs. So some of these scenarios are a lot simpler than some others. We're going to start, however, with the one group of 5 conference, and that being the Mountain West. You see it all right down here. Now, Boise State has already clinched their spot in the Mountain West Conference Championship game. That cannot be changed. Boise State is going to stay in the Mountain West Conference Championship. Now, their opponent, however, that kind of varies. Now, it varies for a couple of reasons. One, okay, let's just go ahead and take a look at the scenarios, and then I can explain to all you fine people further about what is going on. So UNLV and Colorado State, those are the only 2 opponents that can play Boise State in the Mountain West Conference Championship game. UNLV gets in if they're able to beat Nevada this weekend. Why is that the case? Well, that is the case because you take a look at some of the other tiebreakers and other things that the Mountain West uses to determine who gets in to the Mountain West Championship game if there is a tie. Quite simply put, according to Mountain West Conference Championship game tiebreakers and other things, it is necessary to secure your spot in the Mountain West Conference Championship game for UNLV to win and then Colorado State to lose, and vice versa to Colorado State. But the reason that you see all this down here as it is and you don't see UNLV needing the extra loss from Colorado State is because if both teams win this weekend and it goes to a tiebreaker, then, well, the next tiebreaker used, according to what I've read, is the college football playoff ranking system, because UNLV and Colorado State, they did not play in a head-to-head matchup, so you can't use that tiebreaker. And I don't think some of the other tiebreakers work. So I think the Mountain West is saying, like, hey, whoever's ranked higher, if there's a tie, then it goes to the college football playoff ranking, and then we'll figure it out from there. Well, UNLV was ranked in the latest edition of the college football playoff rankings. If they win, that's going to continue to be the case. And if Colorado wins, I still don't think they're going to crack the rankings, which is why I have said that there's no way the committee is going to pull pull something on us and rank Colorado State over UNLV. It's just not going to happen. So UNLV gets in with a win over Nevada. Even if Colorado wins, they'll win the tiebreaker because of college football playoff rankings. And, well, especially if Colorado State loses. Now, if both of these two teams were to lose, this is the one scenario I do want to bring up. If both of these two teams were to lose this week, then computer metrics become sort of the thing, because it's hard for me to see UNLV still being ranked by the playoff committee if they were to lose this upcoming week. Just my opinion, still could happen, in which case UNLV would win that tiebreaker anyway, but UNLV gets in with a win, and Colorado State gets in with a win and a UNLV loss that pretty much secure spots in the conference championship game. UNLV would need a loss to Colorado State, but based on the most likely outcome, which is both teams winning, all UNLV would have to do is win, and they get in by virtue of being ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee. Okay, let's dive on in now to the ACC. All right, so the ACC is here. They are up next, and the ACC, kind of like the Mountain West, not really all that complicated. In fact, it is probably the least complicated out of all of the Power 4 conferences, so I'm not going to take too long discussing the ACC. And this video is also not going to sit here, I should have said this earlier, it's not going to sit here and talk about college football playoff standings and sort of all the little thoughts and opinions on what gets into the college football playoff. Maybe a little bit of that, but I think we're going to save that for either later this week or next week during championship week. There will be a video coming out about playoff scenarios and how certain teams can get in and things of that nature. Not what this video is designed to do. It's here to tell you about conference championship week. So SMU down here. There we go. They have already clinched their spot in the ACC championship game. What a job Rhett Lashley and company have done. I mean, that's just been absolutely phenomenal to watch SMU play football this year. Yeah, they had the one slip up to BYU, but hey, BYU's turned out to be a pretty solid team. SMU have already clinched their spot in the ACC championship game, and it doesn't matter what happens this weekend against the California Golden Bears. So, okay, you're taking a look at these other two teams now. You're looking at Miami and you're looking at Clemson. Quite simply put, it can't get more simpler than this. Both of these teams, if Miami were to win, were to have 7-1 records in conference play. Because of tie-breaking scenarios that the ACC puts forward and some of the other tiebreakers, Miami wins a lot of those tiebreakers. In fact, the more important tiebreakers over Clemson. So simply put, if Miami wins against Syracuse this weekend in the Dome, they are in the ACC championship game. If they lose, Clemson is in the ACC championship game, and it simply is that simple. Simply is simple, right? If Miami wins, they're going to play SMU in the conference championship game. If they don't, that makes way for Clemson, win or lose against South Carolina this weekend, because again, that is a non-conference game. Then it will be Clemson that plays SMU in the ACC championship game. Why does Miami get in with a win? Because they win tiebreakers over the Clemson Tigers. Makes sense? Good. Don't have to linger on that one for too long. Very good. Let's go ahead and move on now, and let's talk about the SEC. All right, so here's where things start to get a little bit complicated. Just a little bit. The SEC is not super complicated quite yet. So what happens now is Georgia has clinched a spot in the SEC championship game. And I'll explain why more so in a little bit. But you're not going to get any of the crazy tie-breaking scenarios that were theorized about earlier, especially on this channel. Now, you're just simply not going to get that. It is pretty much near impossible for that to happen. Obviously, we just saw the chaos that happened in the SEC this past weekend, so nothing is really truly impossible, but it is very unlikely for a ton of 3-loss SEC teams to get together now and pose some sort of weird tie-breaking scenario. This is simply what is going to happen. In fact, actually, it is impossible for that to happen, and we will explain why here. So, Georgia is in. They have locked up their spot going 6-2 in conference, and they win a lot of tiebreakers, and we'll talk about how that is in just a little bit, because I want to talk about this game right now. Theorized on this channel long ago and been talked about for a while. Now it's finally confirmed. Texas and Texas A&M, the winner of that game, even despite Texas A&M's upset against Auburn this past weekend, the winner of this game in College Station will go to the SEC championship game to play the Georgia Bulldogs. So let's play through a couple scenarios here, and it'll show you why the winner of this game gets in and why Georgia gets in as well. I'm not going to play through a ton of scenarios, but the SEC, it is notable to do so. So when you take a look at the scenarios here and you take a look at what happens if Texas is able to win the game in College Station this weekend, well, Texas has only one loss in conference. It would stay that way. They're the only team in the SEC that has that. So Texas would be the number 1 seed, and Georgia would be the number 2 seed. Now, why does Georgia win those tiebreakers? Well, one, you take a look at the other teams that would have 2 conference losses, and it would just be Tennessee. Obviously, the head-to-head tiebreaker, Georgia beat Tennessee on the field. That's why Georgia gets the spot in the SEC championship game. Now, and obviously Texas gets the 1 there because, well, they were 7-1 in conference and no one else matched that record or bettered that record. So Texas would be the 1, Georgia would be the 2 if Texas were to win this weekend. If Texas A&M were to win this weekend, then Texas A&M were to be able to get in, and that forces, as long as Tennessee takes care of business against Vandy, even if they don't, that forces this weird tiebreaker scenario. But Texas A&M would get in because of opponents' combined conference record, and that was the exercise that I did. You basically take the conference records of every single team that played Texas A&M, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, however many teams are tied. So we'll take Texas A&M, for example. You add up their entire whatever the teams they played in conference, whatever they did in conference. So say like Texas A&M played South Carolina, they go 5-3 in conference. You take that 5-3 record and add it to Missouri's 5-3 record, and then you add it to Texas's, if Texas A&M were to beat them, 6-2 record, and so on and so forth, and you get a combined winning percentage. You add up the team's losses, wins, it spits out this number. Texas A&M, despite, or I'd say no matter what happens against Texas this weekend, especially if they win, well then, if they force that tiebreaker scenario, then they win that tiebreaker. So they would get the number 1, and Georgia would get the number 2, because after you run through all the tiebreakers, you have to reset it. And, well, if Tennessee were to take care of business against Vanderbilt, that would leave Texas, Tennessee, and Georgia right there, all sitting at 6-2. And Georgia has head-to-head wins over both of them on the field of play, which is why Georgia would get in the number 2 seed. So no matter what way you slice it, no matter any number of weird tiebreakers, Georgia gets in to the SEC championship game virtue of head-to-head results against Texas and Tennessee. The only way for Texas A&M to get in is they have to win this game. The only way for Texas to get in is they have to win this game. This is a very important game in College Station. The winner will play Georgia. It'll also determine a little bit of seeding as well, because obviously, actually, no, it wouldn't determine seeding. Georgia is the number 2 regardless, so the winner of this game in College Station is your number 1 seed in the SEC championship game. If it is to beat Texas A&M, I mean, that's going to make the college football playoff picture a whole lot messier. If it is Texas, it'll simplify some things, but if you also want to go down the line and you ignore the head-to-head competition thing, Georgia also does hold tiebreaker advantage with the win percentage of conference opponents. Same thing I just talked about with Texas A&M. They would be second, and Tennessee and Texas would fall way behind that regards if there were to be a 4-way tiebreaker. So you take a look at everything. Georgia's in because of head-to-head competition, and the winner of this game in College Station, you are in the SEC championship game. All right, gets a little bit more complicated when we talk about the Big Ten, but again, not really too bad. It's just a lot to talk about when you take a look at the Big Ten Conference right now. So let's take a look at the Oregon Ducks. They have already clinched their spot in the Big Ten championship game. They will be playing for a Big Ten title in Indianapolis, win or lose this weekend against the Washington Huskies. That is set in stone. That cannot change, and it won't change. Oregon, number 1 team in the country in Indianapolis to play for a Big Ten title game. So here's what needs to happen now. There are 3 teams still alive: Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana. They are all still alive for a spot in the Big Ten championship game in Lucas Oil Stadium. And it quite simply goes in this order. If Ohio State wins the game against Michigan, they will rematch Oregon in a game that was phenomenally played in Eugene on both sides. Ohio State will get that rematch in the conference championship game. For Penn State, they need to take care of business this week against Maryland, and they're also hoping that Michigan can go on the road and pull off an upset in the shoe for their 4th straight win against the Ohio State Buckeyes. That's the way for Penn State to get in, because even if Indiana wins, Penn State holds tiebreakers over Indiana, and again, you have to work your way down the line in those tiebreakers. Indiana, all the way over here on the other end, they need to take care of business against Purdue, and they need both Ohio State to lose and Penn State to lose. That's the only way Indiana can still get into the conference championship game, because you take a look at the tiebreakers, why this is. Well, if Ohio State beats Michigan and Penn State and Indiana also win their games this week, well, Ohio State holds head-to-head tiebreakers over both of them. They beat Penn State on the football field. They beat Indiana on the football field. That's why Ohio State would get into the Big Ten championship game. Penn State holds some distant tiebreakers over Indiana, so if Ohio State were to lose, that's their second conference loss, and if Penn State and Indiana were to both win, Penn State wins some distant tiebreakers. I'm not quite sure what that may happen to be, but you get the picture. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Again, you want all the tiebreakers. Ohio State holds head-to-head. Penn State holds some distant tiebreaker. Only way for Indiana to get in is for both of these teams to wind up with their second conference loss. Okay, Big Ten, pretty simple. SEC, pretty simple. ACC, very simple. Mountain West, still pretty simple. Now, yeah, it's time to talk about the Big 12. Where do I even start when you talk about the Big 12? So I'll start with this. The Big 12 commissioners and runners of front office, or whatever you want to call them, basically the admins at the Big Ten and all the people in fancy suits and ties that talk about this sort of stuff came out and said there are 256 different scenarios for the Big 12 Conference Championship game, and that includes results on the field and then combinations for the Big 12 Championship game. What? 200? Are you kidding me? This gets so unbelievably, incredibly convoluted and complicated. It is not even funny. It just quite simply is not even funny. There can be a 4-way tie atop the Big 12 Conference, which there is right now. There can be a 3-team tie, which gets very complicated very fast. And obviously, if there's a 2-way tie atop the Big 12 Conference, well, then those two teams are going to get into the conference championship game. But yeah, this down here, complicated, that might very well be an understatement. Diving on in to the Big 12 Conference Championship race is unlike anything I've had to dive on into before. This might be the most chaotic, most crazy, most just out there tie-breaking scenarios and a bunch of things that have to happen ever in college football. This has been absolutely crazy. So let's simplify a couple of things now, shall we? Let's move on and talk about this graphic here. So, quite simply breaking it down, Iowa State and Arizona State, as long as they win, they are going to be in the Big 12 championship game. I promise I will explain all of this in just a little bit, but I want to simplify it first. As long as Arizona State and Iowa State win, they're going to get in to the Big 12 championship game, and we'll talk about why that is in just a little bit. BYU, in order for them to get into the conference championship game, they need to take care of business against Houston this week, and they will also need a loss from either Arizona State or Iowa State. Why? They hold tiebreakers over the Colorado Buffaloes, so Colorado, still an outside shot for them to get in, but they need to take care of business against Oklahoma State this week, and they need 2 losses from a combination of the 3 teams, Arizona State, Iowa State, and BYU. That basically is simplifying the entire thing. For those of you that just wanted to hear that and see that graphic, you can go ahead and slide on past. For those of you like me that are interested in the more nitty-gritty and the more tie-breaking scenarios, here is why this all takes place. So let's start with the fact that Arizona State and Iowa State, if they win, they're in the conference championship game. Why is that? Well, let's imagine that all of these teams down here win, right? All of these lovely teams down here win their matchup this upcoming weekend, right? So you go to tiebreaker 1. You take a look at head-to-head competition. Well, all 4 of these teams didn't play each other, so you move on to the first tiebreaker they would use, which would be 4 teams which would be head-to-head record against common opponents. This was a problem in the SEC with, again, possible tie-breaking scenarios. Not everyone played everyone. In the Big 12 here, honestly, it's simplified a lot compared to what could have happened in the SEC. But these 4 teams down here have all played 4 common opponents. They are Kansas State, they are Kansas, they are Utah, and they are UCF. So how did all these teams fare in that? Arizona State went 4-0. In this scenario, Iowa State plays Kansas State this weekend, so they would be able to get that win. So Iowa State would go 3-1 with a win against Kansas State. Then BYU goes 3-1, and Colorado is 2-2 against those 4 aforementioned teams. So Arizona State, by virtue of winning that tiebreaker, if there is a 4-way tie, they get in to the conference championship game. Now, what were to happen next? Whenever a team wins a tiebreaker, you reset back to the top of the list for all of the remaining teams. So Arizona State, by virtue of winning all 4 of those games, they're in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. You move on down the way. Let's do that same tiebreaker again. Iowa State 3-1, BYU 3-1, Colorado 2-2. Okay, so Colorado would be out because of losing that tiebreaker against the common opponents there, right? Then your conference opponent win percentage is what you go to, and that's what you're going to have to use to determine Iowa State and BYU. As it stands right now, Iowa State's conference opponents in conference are 31-39, and BYU's are 28-44. And even if there's a whole bunch of scenarios and a whole bunch of things that happen, BYU cannot catch Iowa State in that department. Iowa State's total opponent conference win percentage will be higher than BYU's no matter what, which is exactly why Iowa State, as long as they win, they are going to get in to the conference championship game. That is what happens if there is a 4-way tie and all of these teams win, and that further explains why Arizona State and Iowa State are going to go ahead and get in there. So now BYU and Colorado, they need a little bit of help. They, again, simplifying it, BYU basically needs one of those 2 teams to lose, and Colorado needs one of the 3 teams in front of them to lose. You throw BYU into that mix as well. But here's where things start to get very complicated. So what if there is a 3-team tie? Well, if Colorado loses, it's the same exercise that we just did. Arizona State wins the 4 common opponent thing, and then Iowa State would beat BYU and conference opponent win percentage. Okay, so that's pretty simple. What happens if Arizona State loses and you get Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado tied atop there? Well, Iowa State would get in and BYU would get in. They both are 3-1 against the 4 common opponents that all 4 of these teams have played, against the 4 common opponents that Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado have played. There might even be a 5th one in there, but it doesn't impact anything at all. Iowa State and BYU would be your conference championship game if there is a 3-way tie and Arizona State were the only team to lose. If Iowa State were the only team to lose, you just replace Iowa State with Arizona State in that regards. Again, this is where it's saying as long as one of the 2 teams loses and BYU takes care of business, they are going to get in because they hold tie-breaking wins over Colorado based on the 4 common opponents and how they have fared against common opponents. So if Arizona State loses, BYU wins, and so if the only team out of this 4 to lose is Arizona State, then Iowa State would play BYU, and vice versa. If Iowa State were to be the only team that would lose, BYU would go play Arizona State. Colorado basically needs a whole lot of other chaos to happen. Colorado basically needs either both Iowa State and Arizona State to lose, or they at least need a BYU loss. Because when you dive on in to the 3-team tiebreaker scenarios and BYU is a team that loses, first off, there's no pride and true case that if BYU were to be the only team to lose, then they move on. It actually depends on what else happens around the conference because of other common opponent things and tie-breaking scenarios that I am not going to dive that deep into, but here's what you need to know. If BYU loses, okay, that is step A. Keep that in your mind, put a pin in it, write it on a sticky note, smack it on the wall. BYU loses. Then other things have to happen. If Texas Tech and West Virginia, they play this weekend, and that game, if BYU loses, matters a lot to the Big 12 Conference Championship race. If Texas Tech defeats West Virginia and BYU loses, then okay, so actually let's start with the more simple thing first. I'm actually just noticing this. If West Virginia beats Texas Tech and BYU loses, Arizona State and Iowa State would be your conference championship game. If that were to happen and Arizona State, Iowa State, Colorado were all tied atop there because same exercise we just went through, Arizona State and Iowa State win those tiebreakers over Colorado. If Texas Tech defeats West Virginia, okay, so BYU loses, you put that sticky note up there. Texas Tech beats West Virginia. Put that sticky note up there because then if all of these things happen, if Baylor beats Kansas and Cincinnati beats TCU and Texas Tech defeats West Virginia and BYU loses, Colorado would play Iowa State in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. But if BYU loses and some of those things don't happen, but Texas Tech beating West Virginia has to happen. So if BYU loses, Texas Tech beats West Virginia, and say Kansas beats Baylor, then Colorado would play Arizona State in the conference championship game. Whew, okay, let's recap. 2-team tie, those two teams are going to be in. 4-way tie, it'd be Arizona State and Iowa State because of tie-breaking scenarios we just went through. Arizona State wins the tiebreaker between the 4 common conference opponents that all 4 of these teams have played, and Iowa State wins the conference opponent win percentage thing over BYU. Colorado would be knocked out because of tiebreaker 1. 3-team tie. If Colorado's the only team out of these 4 to lose, Arizona State and Iowa State would get in. If Arizona State's the only team to lose, it'd be Iowa State versus BYU. And if Iowa State's the only team to lose, it'd be Arizona State versus BYU. Now, if BYU loses, sticky note it, Texas Tech has to defeat West Virginia for Colorado to have a shot to get into the Big 12 Conference Championship game. Depending on other results in the conference, that would matter who they played. But the only way for Colorado to get in is BYU needs to lose and Texas Tech needs to beat West Virginia. And then it doesn't matter. If Baylor beats Kansas and Cincinnati beats TCU, then Iowa State would get in by virtue of other tiebreakers. Otherwise, if those two things don't happen, or if only one of the things happen, then Colorado would play Arizona State. But if BYU loses and West Virginia defeats Texas Tech, then we're just back to the top of the list. Arizona State and Iowa State would be your Big 12 Conference Championship game. Yeah, you can see how that gets pretty complicated pretty fast. Oh, but Nate, wait. What if all 4 of them lose? Not even going there. Just not going there. It is too complicated, too convoluted. Then literally every game in the Big 12 Conference were to matter. But generally, here's what you need to know. If there's a 6, 7, 8-way tiebreaker atop the conference with all of these teams that have 3 conference losses, if all 4 of these teams up here were to lose, generally a 6, 7, or 8-way tiebreaker favors Baylor first, then Texas Tech. Obviously, that meaning Texas Tech is beating West Virginia, followed by Kansas State and West Virginia. That West Virginia-Texas Tech game, if we're going to have a 6, 7, 8-way tiebreaker, is going to matter a lot depending on who wins that game because they're going to be favored more heavily in tiebreakers. But I'm not going to dive deep into that. That is so unlikely, so far out of reach because Colorado and BYU have winnable games and games that they honestly should win. Colorado's playing Oklahoma State. BYU's playing Houston. Arizona State on the road against Arizona. Watch out for that one. I know Arizona hasn't been the best, but they're still talented enough to keep it close and sneaky. And then Iowa State sitting right there as well. But I'm not even going to dive on in to if all 4 of these teams were to lose because then it just gets chaotic. As I said earlier, 256 possible scenarios in the Big 12 Conference. Whew, that took a while to explain. But I am going to end this video off here. I've rambled on enough, and it took me some time to explain those Big 12 tiebreakers. I thank you for sitting through this journey with me. If you watch the whole thing, credit to you, hats off to you. If you just skimmed through it, you wanted to see what would happen, hey, no pleasure. I appreciate you tuning in regardless. Support the channel any way you can. Like, comment, share. Please just have a fantastic day. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. And I'll see all of you guys in the next video. Goodbye.